When my daughter-in-law told me to stop visiting, I smiled instead of crying. It wasn't because it didn't hurt. It did. It was the kind of pain that sits quietly in your chest, the kind that doesn't scream or break things. It just stays there, heavy, like an old photograph you can't throw away. I remember standing at their doorstep that day, a small bag in my hand, just a few things I'd brought for them, some sweets I had made, a sweater I had knitted for my son. He used to love the sweaters I made. Back when he was little, he'd say, "Mama, yours are softer than the store ones." But that day, he didn't even notice I had one in my hand. He just looked uncomfortable, like he didn't know where to place me in his new life. And when she said, gently but firmly, "It's better if you call before coming, Mother," he didn't say anything. He just lowered his eyes. That silence, it said everything. I walked back home slowly that day. The air felt different. I don't know if it was the wind or my heart, but something inside me had changed. I'm not a bitter woman. Life hasn't been easy for me, but I've learned to smile through storms. When my husband passed away, our son, Arav, was only 12. I still remember his face at the funeral, confused, scared, and trying to be brave for me. That day, I made myself a promise. No matter what, I'll raise him with love so he never feels alone in this world. And I did. I worked double shifts at the local school, sewing uniforms at night just to keep him in good schools. He never complained, never asked for more. He was the kind of boy who said, "Mama, when I grow up, you'll never have to work again." Sometimes I think that promise still echoes somewhere inside me, a memory that feels both sweet and heavy. Our home was small, 2 rooms, a little kitchen, and a veranda where I used to dry his school shirts. He'd come home running after school, dropping his bag and saying, "Mama, I'm starving." We'd laugh and I'd hand him a plate of rice and curry. Those small moments, the sound of his laughter, the smell of food on the stove, they were my world. You know, when you raise a child alone, you don't just play the role of a mother. You become their friend, teacher, and father, too. Every smile of theirs feels like a reward, and every tear feels like failure. Arav grew up to be everything I prayed for. Smart, kind, hardworking. He got a good job in the city. He'd call me every evening. "Did you eat, Mama? Are you resting?" I'd tease him, "You sound like my father." And he'd laugh. That laughter, it filled my little house with light. When he told me he'd met someone, a girl named Mira, I remember feeling a strange mix of pride and fear. He said she was gentle, educated, and came from a good family. He sounded so happy, and for a mother, that happiness is everything. Still, I couldn't help worrying. You see, when you've lived alone with someone for years, your love becomes like air, always there, invisible, but essential. And the thought of losing that closeness, even to someone wonderful, it hurts in ways words can't describe. Their wedding was beautiful, small but full of laughter and blessings. I wore a simple silk sari, and I remember standing quietly in the corner, watching him smile for the photographs. He looked so grown up and so far away already. After the wedding, he said, "Mama, don't worry, nothing will change." And I wanted to believe him. I really did. But things do change. Not all at once, just little by little, like sand slipping through your fingers. At first, it was the small things. He'd call a little less. He'd visit only on Sundays, and sometimes even that became too busy. He stopped asking about my meals, and when I'd ask about his, he'd say, "Mama, Mira takes care of all that now." That line, "Mira takes care of it," it became a wall between us. One evening, it rained heavily. The power was out, and I sat alone in my house, listening to the thunder. I wanted to call him, just to hear his voice, but I stopped myself. He'd said earlier, "Mama, we might have guests tonight. Don't call late." So I didn't. I just sat there, watching the rain trickle down the window, thinking how silence can sometimes sound louder than thunder. Weeks later, he called. "Mama, Mira and I want you to come stay with us for a few days." My heart leapt. I packed my things carefully, some homemade pickles, a shawl for Mira, and that same old photo of Arav as a boy. When I reached their home, it was beautiful, modern, bright, and yet it didn't feel like home. Not to me. Mira was polite, kind even, but there was a distance in her tone, like she was being respectful out of duty, not affection. I tried not to mind. After all, I was a guest now, in my son's world. The first few days were fine. We talked, shared meals, and I told her stories from Arav's childhood. But slowly, I could feel her irritation. Maybe I talked too much. Maybe I offered too many suggestions. You know how mothers can be. We don't realize when our care starts sounding like interference. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. It used to be the smell of tea that filled our home, but now everything was different. The sounds, the flavors, even the way silence felt. I came out quietly, not wanting to disturb them. Mira was sitting on the couch, typing something on her phone. Arav was in the kitchen, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "Good morning," I said softly. He looked up, a bit startled. "Oh, morning, Mama. Did you sleep well?" "Yes," I smiled. "The room is lovely." He nodded, but before I could say more, his phone buzzed. A work call. He walked away, and I stood there for a second, unsure if I should sit, speak, or just go back to my room. Mira looked up and smiled politely. Not cold, but not warm either. Just polite. "Would you like some coffee, Mother?" "No, dear. I'll make some tea for myself." Her eyes flickered. Maybe she didn't want me in her kitchen again. But I went anyway. My hands knew where the kettle was, the way old habits never forget their purpose. I poured the water, placed the tea bag, and as the steam rose, I whispered to myself, "Don't take it to heart. They're young, they're busy." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't just about being busy. It was about belonging, and I no longer knew where I fit in. That evening, we sat together for dinner. The table was beautifully set. Silver cutlery, soft lights, and a calm hush. I tried to talk about old times, about how Arav used to help me in the kitchen as a child. But Mira smiled and changed the topic. She began talking about their upcoming vacation plans. I nodded along, pretending to be interested, but inside, I felt smaller with every word. Vacations, promotions, new restaurants. These were things beyond my simple world. Arav didn't notice. He laughed with her, shared glances, and the sound of their joy felt like a closed door. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, but my mind was full. I sat by the window, looking at the streetlights fading into the mist. When you live alone for years, you learn to talk to silence. But this silence was different. This one was full of words that were never said. I kept thinking about the day I raised him alone. Those nights I'd stay up sewing his school uniform because we couldn't afford a new one. The times I'd skip dinner so he could have more. The times I prayed, God, just keep him safe. That's all I ask. And now that same boy lived just across the hallway, yet felt miles away. A few days later, it rained again. I always loved the rain. It made everything feel alive. But in their house, it felt like a stranger. I was sitting near the window when Mita came in. She looked tired. Mama, we're going to a friend's place tonight. You don't have to wait up. Oh, I said, trying to sound cheerful. Have fun, dear. She nodded and left. When they both drove off, the silence returned. Louder, heavier, emptier. I walked to the kitchen and made myself some tea. The cup felt warm in my hands, and for a moment, I imagined Otto sitting beside me like he used to, telling me about his day, asking if I'd eaten. But that image faded as quickly as it came. The next morning, Mira seemed distant. Otto had left early for work. I was folding laundry in my room when I heard her on the phone. Her voice was low, but I caught a few words. She means well, but it's just too much sometimes. A pause. I don't want to sound rude, but it's affecting us. I stopped folding. I stood still, my heart pounding. She was talking about me. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling slightly. I wasn't angry, just hollow, because it suddenly hit me. I had become a burden in my own son's home. I waited until she left for her errands, and then I quietly went around the house. I cleaned the dishes, swept the floor, arranged the cushions, trying to make myself useful, as if usefulness could earn love. When Arav came home that evening, he seemed tired. We sat for dinner again, and I noticed how Mira barely looked at me. After the meal, Arav came to my room. Mama, everything okay? Yes, I said softly, forcing a smile. You look tired, beta. Eat well, rest well. He nodded, but just as he turned to go, I said, Arav, do you feel I'm in the way here? He froze. Why would you think that, Mama? Just asking. He hesitated, then said, It's just, you know, Mita's still adjusting. She's not used to sharing space. You know how modern couples are. I nodded, slowly. Of course, I whispered, pretending I understood. But inside, it felt like a quiet goodbye, one that hadn't yet been spoken. Days turned into weeks. I noticed how every gesture of mine seemed to create discomfort. If I offered advice, I was old-fashioned. If I stayed quiet, I was too distant. So I began withdrawing, bit by bit. Less talking, less helping, less being seen. Sometimes Arav would notice. He'd say, Mama, you're too quiet lately. And I'd just smile and reply, I'm getting older, Bita. Silence keeps me company now. But silence doesn't comfort. It eats you from the inside. One night, we were all watching a movie together. Something funny came on, and Arav laughed so hard. I looked at him and smiled. It was that same boyish laugh I'd missed. But when Mita turned to him and placed her hand on his arm, he looked back at her, not me. And in that small, tender moment, I realized something had shifted permanently. His laughter no longer belonged to me. It belonged to their world, one I could watch but never enter. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. I thought of all the mothers who raise their children alone, believing love will be their reward. And maybe it is for a while. But then life takes its own course. Children grow, hearts change, and you're left holding memories that don't fit into their new lives. The next morning, I started packing my things. Arav was surprised when he saw me. Mama, where are you going? Home, I said quietly. Why? You can stay longer. I smiled. Beta, I've stayed long enough. You two need your own space. And I have my own little world too. He looked uneasy. Did Mira say something? No, I lied. Nothing at all. She's a lovely girl. He nodded. But I could see the relief in his eyes, and that told me everything. When I reached my home, the air felt still but familiar. The walls, the photographs, the worn-out furniture, everything welcomed me back like an old friend. I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and let the quiet fill the room. It didn't feel lonely this time. It felt honest. Sometimes peace doesn't come from being surrounded by people. It comes from finally accepting where you no longer belong. I looked at an old photograph of Arav. He was 6, smiling, holding a kite. I touched the picture and whispered, You'll always be my little boy, even if you forget to look back. When I returned home, the first few days felt strangely light. No footsteps, no voices, no sound of clinking dishes from another room. Just the familiar rhythm of my own breathing. At first I kept myself busy. I cleaned, watered the plants, rearranged the old cupboard, as if putting things in order could calm the ache in my heart. But the silence crept back each evening. You know that hour when the sun begins to fade and the light turns golden? That's when loneliness speaks the loudest. I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching children from the neighborhood running home, calling out, Amma, dinner's ready. Their voices echoed through the street like warm music. And I would smile. Not because I was happy, but because that sound reminded me of a time when my home was filled with that same laughter. Arav called once a week. His voice was gentle, always the same questions. Mama, how are you? Did you eat? And my answers were always the same too. Yes, beta, I'm fine. We never talked for long. He was always on his way to a meeting, or Mira was calling him from the background. He'd say, I'll talk to you later, Mama. And then the line would go quiet.
I never blamed him, I told myself. He's busy. Life is full now. But one night, I dropped a plate while washing dishes. It shattered across the floor. And as I bent down to pick the pieces, a small cut on my finger began to bleed. It was such a tiny wound, but it broke something inside me. Because for the first time in years, there was no one to say, "Mama, are you okay?" Days passed, then weeks. I started feeling weak. Maybe age, maybe sadness. My neighbor, Mrs. D'Souza, noticed I hadn't been out for groceries. She came over one afternoon and said, "You need rest, dear. Let me make you some soup." She fussed over me like a friend would, and I realized how kind strangers can be when family forgets to notice. That evening, when Arav called, I told him lightly, "I have been feeling a bit tired these days." He sounded concerned for a moment. "Oh, are you okay? Should I send Meera over?" I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "No, beta, don't worry, it's just the weather." He hesitated, then said, "Take your medicines. Mama, I'll call you tomorrow." But tomorrow came and went, and the phone didn't ring. A few days later, I fell ill. It wasn't serious, but I couldn't get out of bed for 2 days. The house felt colder than usual, and I remember thinking, so this is what getting old alone feels like? I didn't call Arav. I didn't want to sound needy. Mothers aren't supposed to need. We're supposed to give. Quietly, endlessly. By the third day, Mrs. D'Souza insisted on taking me to the clinic. The doctor said it was fatigue and mild dehydration. Nothing serious, but I could feel how fragile I'd become. Not just in body, but in spirit. That night, I sat by my window again, watching the moon behind a curtain of clouds. I whispered a small prayer. "God, if my boy ever remembers me, let it be with love, not guilt." 2 months went by. Arav's calls became even rarer. Sometimes Meera would call instead, her voice kind but hurried. "Mother, Arav is traveling. We'll visit soon." But soon never came. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived. No one sends letters anymore, so my hands trembled as I opened it. It was from Arav. He wrote that he had been promoted, that they were planning to move abroad for a year. At the end, a single line. "We'll miss you, Mama. Take care of yourself." I read that line over and over. There was no "I love you," no "we'll visit before we go," just "take care." And I realized that's how people say goodbye without actually saying the word. I kept that letter on my bedside table. Every night I'd read it once, like a ritual that hurt but also kept him close. Then one morning, I collapsed while watering the plants. It wasn't serious, just a fainting spell, but the neighbors insisted on calling him. Mrs. D'Souza dialed the number and explained what happened. Within hours, my phone rang. "Mama, what happened? Are you okay?" I smiled weakly, hearing panic in his voice for the first time in months. "I'm fine, beta. Just a little dizzy, that's all." "Why didn't you call me?" "I didn't want to worry you." He silenced for a while, then said, "I'll come tomorrow." Tomorrow. That word again. But this time he did come. When I opened my eyes the next morning, he was sitting beside my bed, holding my hand. He looked older, maybe tired, guilty. Mama, you should have told me. I told you I'm fine, I said softly. You never complain. You just keep everything inside? I smiled faintly. Old habits, beta. We sat there for a while. No words, just the sound of our breathing. And in that quiet, I felt something between us stir, a memory of what used to be. Later that evening, Meera arrived too. She came in with flowers, her face pale. Mother, I'm so sorry. We didn't know you were unwell. I smiled. It's all right, dear. Life keeps everyone busy. She placed the flowers on my table, and for the first time, her eyes met mine, really met them. There was guilt there and something softer. Maybe realization?
For the next 2 days, they stayed with me. Arav cooked, Mira cleaned, and my little house came alive again. Laughter, warmth, the sound of doors opening and closing. Everything felt familiar. But deep inside, I knew it was temporary. They were here out of concern, not because they wanted to come back. Still, I was grateful. One evening, as we sat on the veranda, the sun dipping low, Arav said, Mama, Mira and I have been talking. We want you to come live with us when we move abroad. I looked at him quietly. I could see he meant well, but I also knew the truth. This was guilt speaking, not love. So I smiled and said, No, beta, my roots are here. My memories, your father's picture, this home, they all live here. He tried to insist, but I shook my head. Don't make promises out of guilt, Arav. Love me honestly, not out of duty. His eyes filled up. Mama, I never stopped loving you. I know, I said softly. You just forgot how to show it. That night, after they slept, I sat by the window again. The moon was full, lighting the empty street, and I whispered, Thank you, God. He came back, even if just for a moment. Because sometimes love doesn't need to last forever to be real. Sometimes it just needs to return once, so you can let it go peacefully. After Arav and Meera decided to stay a few extra days, the house began to feel alive again. Every sound, the kettle's whistle, the creak of the old floorboards, the faint hum of the ceiling fan, suddenly seemed warmer, as if even the walls were relieved to hear voices again. I sat in the kitchen one morning, watching Meera chop vegetables. She worked carefully, every movement calm and graceful. I wanted to tell her she reminded me of my younger self, but the words stayed behind my lips. Instead, I simply said, You cook beautifully, beta. She looked up, a little startled. Thank you, mother. And then softer, I should have learned from you before. That one line, so small, yet so full of meaning, made my eyes sting. It wasn't an apology. It was something better. Understanding. For the first time in months, we had breakfast together. Arav talked about his new job, his travel plans, and even asked if I'd like him to bring something from abroad. I laughed. Bring me only stories, beta. I have enough things. He smiled. That same shy smile he had as a boy when he'd hide his report card behind his back. In that moment, I saw my son again. Not the man distracted by work, not the husband balancing a new life, but the boy who once held my hand crossing the street.
As they helped around the house, I noticed something subtle in Mira. Her tone softened, her steps slower when she spoke to me. She'd call from the kitchen, "Mother, do you want your tea strong or light?" It was such a simple question, but to me, it felt like a bridge rebuilding itself. One afternoon, rain began again, gentle, rhythmic. I stood by the window and Mira came beside me. She said quietly, "Arav told me how much you love the rain." I nodded. "Your father and I used to sit exactly like this," I said, pointing outside. He would joke that the rain was heaven's way of washing away old sorrows. She smiled faintly. "Maybe it's washing ours too." We both stayed silent after that, just listening to the rain. Sometimes words only disturb what silence heals. That evening, Arav sat with me on the veranda. He had his head down, fingers clasped, as if searching for courage. "Mama," he began, "I keep thinking about all the times I didn't call, all the times you waited." I placed my hand on his. "Don't carry guilt, beta. It's too heavy for love to survive under it." He looked up, his eyes wet. "But I hurt you." I smiled gently. "Yes, but pain is a part of love, Arav. I felt both from the day you were born." He leaned his head on my shoulder like he used to as a child. For the first time in years, I felt his weight against me. Not just his body, but his trust. We stayed like that for a long time, saying nothing. Because sometimes forgiveness doesn't need a sentence. It needs silence and closeness. The following days passed in a calm rhythm. I noticed how Mira began setting an extra cup for me at tea time, without being asked. She even brought my medicines before I could reach for them. One evening she sat near my bed and said, "Mother, when you first came to live with us, I didn't understand how to share space. I felt like I was failing if I couldn't keep everything perfect. But I see now. You weren't trying to control. You were just trying to love." I reached out and held her hand. "Every woman learns that lesson differently, beta. You'll be a mother someday, and then you'll understand all the unspoken things love hides." She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. Then she did something she had never done before. She hugged me, not lightly, not politely, but with real warmth, her arms trembling around me. In that embrace, every harsh word, every quiet distance dissolved like salt in water.
Before they left for their trip abroad, Arav helped fix the broken lock on my gate. "Can't have you wrestling with this when I'm gone," he joked. I laughed. "You used to climb this gate barefoot when you were little." He grinned. "And you'd chase me with a towel." We both laughed until we cried. It felt good. Not the laughter itself, but knowing we could still find it together. When their taxi arrived, Mira came to me, touching my feet gently. I placed my hand on her head and said, "Take care of my son and yourself. Remember, marriage isn't about ownership, it's about grace." She nodded, eyes glistening. Arav hugged me tightly. "I'll call every week, promise." I smiled. "Call when your heart remembers, beta. That's enough." As they drove away, I waved until the car disappeared from sight. And for the first time, I didn't cry. Because this goodbye wasn't built on pain. It was built on peace. That night, I walked through the house slowly. Every object, the clock, the old chairs, the photo on the wall, seemed to glow softly in the lamplight. I touched my husband's framed picture. "See?" I whispered. "He's grown up just like we hoped." A faint wind stirred the curtains, and I felt in that tiny moment as if my husband's presence smiled back at me. I sat down and began writing a letter, not to Arav, but for myself. "Dear self, you did your part. You raised him with love, and you let him go with grace. Some days your heart will ache again, but don't mistake longing for regret. You gave him roots, and now he's found his wings. That's what mothers are meant to do." I folded the letter and kept it inside my prayer book, not for him to find, but for me. A reminder of peace earned through patience.
Weeks passed. True to his word, Arab called often. Sometimes they'd video call me from the new apartment abroad. He'd show me the kitchen, the view, the city lights. Mira would join in, smiling, asking about my garden. And though distance remained, it felt gentler now. Not like separation, but like space filled with care. One evening, I received a small parcel. Inside was a shawl, soft, blue, hand-woven, and a note in Arif's handwriting. "For the woman who taught me warmth." I held it to my chest, tears rolling down my face, not from sadness, but from something purer, quieter. Pride, relief, love. That night, as rain began to fall again, I sat by the window wrapped in that shawl. The street glistened under lamplight, and somewhere in the distance a child's laughter echoed. I smiled and whispered to the rain, "Maybe heaven really does wash away old sorrows." Because that's what it felt like, the slow cleansing of years of longing, leaving behind only gratitude. I realized then that motherhood isn't a story of constant presence. It's a story of quiet endurance, of knowing when to hold on and when to step back. Love doesn't fade when it changes form. It only becomes softer, like the evening light that lingers long after the sun has set.
It's been almost a year since that visit. Seasons have changed, the flowers in my garden have bloomed and wilted, and the once empty rooms of my house have found a strange kind of stillness. Not lonely, just quiet. Every morning, I make myself a cup of tea, open the curtains, and let the sunlight spill across the room. The silence that once hurt now feels like an old friend, one that sits beside me, reminding me how far I've come. Arif calls every Sunday. Sometimes it's a quick hello between flights. Sometimes he talks for hours, telling me about his work, his travels, how Mira has started learning my old recipes.
And when he says, "Ma, Mira made your dal today," I laugh and say, "Did she add too much salt?" He laughs back, and for a moment, we're back in that tiny kitchen from years ago. Him sitting on the counter, swinging his legs, watching me stir the pot as if it were magic. Every time I hang up, I whisper a small prayer, not asking for more, just thanking life for giving me this peace. Because love, I've learned, doesn't vanish when distance grows. It simply shifts shape.
from a mother's constant presence to a quiet blessing that follows her child wherever he goes. I no longer wait by the phone or stare at the door. I simply live, softly, gently, and with gratitude. I cook, I read, I water my plants, and sometimes I sit by the window watching the rain as if it's washing away whatever sorrow still lingers inside. Sometimes the neighborhood children come by, asking for sweets or to play with my old cat. They fill the air with laughter, and in their tiny faces, I see glimpses of Arav, his curiosity, his kindness, his restless joy. When they call me Auntie, I smile and think, maybe motherhood doesn't end when your child grows up. Maybe it just finds new faces to care for. I tell them stories, not about pain or loss, but about patience, kindness, and time. Because I want them to know that love is never wasted, even when it feels forgotten. One night, I sat on the veranda under a quiet sky. The moon was full, bathing everything in soft light. I thought of my husband, his laughter, his calm strength, the way he'd always say, "Love them freely, and they'll find their way home." I smiled through tears, whispering, "You were right." Because Arav did find his way back. Not in grand gestures or endless apologies, but in the quiet moments. In every phone call, every shared recipe that still feels alive. And Mira, the girl I once misunderstood, now messages me photos of the food she makes, asks for my advice on small things, and calls me Ma with the kind of warmth that once lived only in my dreams. If you were to ask me what I've learned, I'd say this. Love isn't about keeping people close. It's about keeping your heart open, even when they walk away. Because sometimes the distance they take is the very space they need to remember who you are to them. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean saying it's okay. Sometimes it means saying, "I understand." And when you can say that, truly, from your heart, you set yourself free. Tonight, as I sit by the window again, wrapped in the shawl Arav sent me, I watch the rain fall softly over the garden. Each drop glistens for a moment before disappearing into the earth. I think, that's what love is like too. It falls, it disappears, but it never really leaves. It becomes part of who we are. So I close my eyes, smile through the quiet, and whisper one last line to the night. A mother's love doesn't fade when her son forgets her. It simply waits until he remembers again.